Hey everyone, welcome to the show, Handing the Shame Back. My name's Gloria Masters and I'm your host. It's my pleasure every week to bring you a survivor from across New Zealand and the rest of the world who has experienced child sexual abuse. The numbers are frightening, the silence is deafening, and that is why I do what I do. So welcome. We always have a trigger warning with the show simply because the content is, by its very nature, triggering and difficult. And today is no exception. So, if for any reason you fabulous person out there feel triggered, please do go to the show notes below and you'll be directed to some resource and support. In the meantime, have I got an incredible survivor to introduce you to today? So, his name is Dean Clarkson. He comes from South Auckland in Auckland, New Zealand. He's a survivor. He's a founder. He's a trailblazing founder, actually, and he'll tell us more about that. And he's also a wonderful father. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Kia ora, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel very honored to be here today.
Awesome. So, Dean, what we tend to do is just start at the beginning, your story of child sexual abuse. We don't need graphic details, that doesn't suit
Sure.
anybody. Oh, and welcome to our beautiful survivor community watching.
Mm, Kia
Okay,
ora.
over to you, Dean. How start wherever you're
Yeah,
comfortable. Um,
sure. Um, yeah, we grew up in a different part. It was a different part of Auckland at the time when I first experienced this, and it was out in West Auckland, and that. You can tell by the grey hairs that it was a while ago, and but I recall this is back in the early 80s, um, and I grew up in the era in our country where we would just you know we really didn't have a lot of fences back in the day. When we grew up, we ran across our playground was everyone's property. We would gratefully go next door with a cup and ask for a cup of flour or sugar or borrow some eggs. But in our neighborhood, we kind of knew everybody, which is very different to what today's world is. But I remember, and you knew where you were felt safe. As a child. I mean, I'm talking back when I was 4, 5, 6. And I recall this moment when we were playing as a whole lot of kids in the community, um, just hide and seek, normal hide and seek. But there was an older boy in the community who I remember him coming up to me and he said to me, um, down the back of your house, there's all these harakeke or flax bushes. Um, and if you go down there, and you push through, it kind of opens up in the middle, in the corner of the property, and you can hide in there, and no one will even be able to see you or find you. And so I remember I was excited because I thought I was going to win, and as a young boy, and I went in there, um, and I pushed my way through, and I got into the space, and I'm like, oh, and then I had to sit down in this, I tried to squat down, but I was a little bit more nervous about the worms and the different things on the ground at the time. But I remember sitting there and I could hear everyone running and found you, da, da, found you, this and all of that was going on. And I remember instinctively in that moment, this guy come in to where I was, and I thought, oh, he's going to use the same hiding place. Um, And then it was in that moment where he proceeded to sexually abuse me. And now, in that moment, I didn't really, probably hadn't even heard the word sexual abuse. I would have been, I'm thinking I was about 5 or 6 at the time when that happened. And I recall and I call it a puku. Puku in Aotearoa, New Zealand is your stomach, your gut feeling, when you feel something in your gut. And I call it my puku radar went off. Because I knew that what was happening was not okay, but I didn't have any words to articulate that. And then with my years in working in community, I realized everything that you always hear, don't say anything, otherwise you're going to get in heaps of trouble. And yeah, there was a whole lot of other words, that were spoken, but I do recall that moment and I just was like, I don't know what to do with that. So I'll just sweep that under the carpet, right? And so I did that and carried on and just got on with life. Um, Never really saw that person ever again. Um, I saw him around the community, but he never came after that and never really came and hung out with us kids. Um, but
How
I
old
knew
would he have
exactly,
been? How old
sorry.
would how old would he have been, would you say, at that time?
I think it would have been in his teenage years. He was a lot older than us.
Yeah.
And I think him, I'm, going back, I'm going back 45 years, but I think one of his siblings was, more the ones that we would play with, but he came along at this point. And yeah, and I remember because we had friends that lived, there was like one of those little um, streets that kind of you start at one end and it comes out the other, and right at the center of that street when you go around it was our family friend's place, and we would go there often. And I remember having to go past his um, place. I knew where his house was, and I remember always looking, as a child, is he there? Or but again, never talking to anybody, never sharing any of that, just because I was told I couldn't. And I was afraid. I was afraid of what would happen. Um, and if my parents, you know, they would be devastated to know that I felt like that as a child. But what I did, I felt like that. I felt I couldn't tell anybody, even though my parents would have. I would hate to think what would have happened if they knew, but
Yeah. I
I
mean,
was afraid.
and I think that's a really good point. So for survivors watching, some of you will have had an experience where when you're being manipulated like that or threatened like that, because the conditioning was always to do what you are told. If someone's older than you respect them, you obey them, you just follow along. So it's no surprise that, of course, even though the instinct was screaming at you, um, you had to override that because you didn't quite know what would happen if you didn't. And that's where the fear and the grooming, we call it grooming, and there's four different
Yeah.
types when children are being sexually abused. But I just think that's an important point for our survivors, Dean. So
Mm.
you obviously didn't tell anybody, and those feelings got swept under the carpet. But my question to you is this: yes, they may have got swept under the carpet, but it would have shown itself somehow. Your behavior might have changed a little. You might have become more anxious. I don't know. How do you think that manifested in
I,
you?
I don't think I was an anxious. Oh, I mean, there was my own stuff with my dad, growing up, and me and my dad, like mates now, we're like best mates. But I remember he was just a hard man growing up, and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't like as a son growing up. And I had to talk to him about that when I was about 27. And I remember, I think it shattered his world, to be honest. But I remember in those moments for me, just, I think about that now, and he was, well, now that I know his own story,
Yeah.
it gives context,
Yeah.
and so it doesn't excuse the behavior, it gives you context of what it was like. And I always say, there's always someone that is worse off than you, but it was still painful for me. And I think for me, what the way I saw it manifest was probably more my own self-esteem.
Yeah.
Like I abused my body. Uh, Um, and I think that started back then. Um, I, you know, I, yeah, I abused my body, and through either food or even as an adult, and my later stuff, all the stuff that used to happen, would eat and drink and all those things, and didn't actually take care of this. I can take care of anybody else,
Yeah.
and I would make sure that everyone else is absolutely safe. But in terms of looking after myself, I just didn't. And I think that's probably how it did manifest for me, is that yeah, I would go into situations feeling, I think if anything, if my radar went up. There was this radar that went, was on high alert all the time, and I'm constantly looking um around, you know, and observing what's going on, and I never wanted anything like that to happen to anybody. So um
And that's well-known languaging for us as survivors. We call that hypervigilance. That's one of
mm,
the hallmarks, actually, because never again do you ever feel really safe.
yeah,
And so that sweeping, that constant sweeping behind you, beside you, in front of you, outside, who's there? How,
yeah,
So I guess, Dean, as we're moving on through that, and you recognize that the impact was, lack of self-love or lack of
mm,
self-esteem, which manifests in, abusing the body, whether through, for some of our survivors, it could have been drugs, alcohol, work,
yeah,
just too overwork. Work becomes everything. Food, gambling, like there's so
yeah.
many things. Sex, so many things.
Self-harm was a big one. Like I remember as at high school, and I think, this sounds, when I say it out loud, because I never want anyone to hear it and feel that bad, but in that moment for me, I kind of go, I I would self-harm so that people would notice me,
Yeah,
because someone didn't see that, someone didn't find me in that moment.
yeah.
And so by self-harming, I would cut myself, and I was, I know I used to cut my, face, and create black eyes so that people would, um, and I would make up a story that would go with that, because I wanted someone to notice me. Hey, I wanted to be seen. Um, and I noticed that that behavior happened, from a real young age.
So that kind of look at me, see me, show me some kindness or empathy, look after me, value me for that one occasion where that didn't happen
Mm,
because you couldn't find the words. And yeah, that's really powerful, Dean.
mm,
You then went on, you grew older, and
yes.
obviously that behavior continued. And then, probably reaching from about the age of 10, were there other situations that occurred to you?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
there was. We moved. That's when we moved when I was young. I was about 7, I think. We moved out south, back out, back. Oh, we moved south,
yeah,
and have been here ever since. But I remember, we connected in with the family. Like school, community. And there was a situation that arose in a people that we were really close with. And I recall, just being the dynamics of the families. It meant that I ended up with this particular person who was a lot older than me. But And it wasn't long after that you know, and it was a female this time. So it was a different experience.
Yeah.
And she would make me do things to her. Just quite a domineering personality, like quite a strong, um, domineering woman and or young girl at the time. And but the thing that was different in that moment was that my body reacted, so
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I'm going, no, 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 what's happening? Because I'm going through all of this journey as a young man, growing up and puberty and all of these things. And and then you would hear people, and by this stage you start to hear comments and know about sex and things like that, and you hear people saying, "Oh, that's all guys want. That's all they're interested in is sex and da 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 da." And which is really kind of we have to be really careful with our words and the language we use, because whilst that might be amazing in the right context and in a loving relationship, to have that forced upon you is not, it's not, it's not something that you actually want. But
Well,
your physiology, it changes because that's the way we're created. And so when that happened, that was a real shock to me because I was like, oh, there is no way in hell I can even tell anybody. This is, even though the same narrative was said to me, don't speak about it, don't tell anyone, I'll shame you. You know, and the thing about that, which I found, I reflect on now as a man, but I remember I was afraid of my own dad, and I was afraid of my of this girl's dad. Now, not for any other reason, but I was scared that I didn't know how you got pregnant. I hadn't gone down hadn't had that conversation yet. I didn't know what was, and I was afraid that their phone was going to ring, and someone's going to say that Dean's got my daughter pregnant. And so I had this little black backpack. It was an old school bag, and I had kept it, and it was a bit ripped and stuff. But I put clothes in it, and I put it in. I had that hidden in my manhole in my room, on my top of my wardrobe, in my wardrobe. Because if that phone rang, I often would find myself rushed to the phone, and me and my sister would fight over, whether I was, why I was getting the phone. No one actually knew why I wanted to get to the phone first, because I knew that if I picked that phone up and it was her dad or my dad from his, because he was a shift worker, that I would drop that phone and I was grabbing that bag and I was gone. I didn't know where I was going, but I was gone.
yeah. So I just want to stop you because what you're
Yeah.
saying there's so many threads to it, and you're doing great, Dean. Thank you, by the way. That, first of all, let's call it what it is. It's sexual abuse.
Yes.
So let's not sugarcoat it. No matter what the narrative is that people like to share about young boys and older females that are abusing them, this is it is child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So we don't need to call it anything other than what it is and what that was. So you were again manipulated through being threatened and groomed. You had no choice, you had no out. And I just want to be really clear with that. The second thing you've kind of raised, which I think you and I had a conversation off here a few days ago around this, the body reacts because it's designed to. It's what
Mm.
it does. If you're cold, you're going to shiver. If you're hot, you're going to sweat. Someone's
Yeah.
going to touch your genitals, you're going to respond
Totally.
accordingly. If you get pollen in your nose, you're going to sneeze. That's what that is. We have no
Totally.
control over that. But unfortunately, because of the grooming and the manipulation and the ridiculous toxic narrative out there around how lucky are you, that's all boys or men want, there's nowhere I can imagine for you to have been able to take that, because
Mm.
once again, you see the thread that emerges is once again, you're trapped in silence. So the only way you can manage it is to try in your own childlike brain to come up with a solution. So yours is to pack a bag so you can run.
Yeah.
How horrible that must have been.
Oh, it was that, and I think for me, anxiety went up tenfold in that time, in that season of my
Mm.
life.
Yeah.
Seriously, because I was, and that went on for about 2 odd years,
And how old were you when that began?
8 or 9, I think,
8 or 9. Yeah.
around about, yeah.
Okay.
And so, like that was, maybe a bit older actually. I'm not. Probably no, probably about 8, 9. I don't know what I'm trying to think about what standard I was in, you know.
Mhm.
I was probably around standard two, I think. Standard two, I think,
Okay.
is when it started for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh. And so that went on for a couple of years.
Yes.
And then that ended, and of course, you couldn't tell anyone, so you never did.
No. And it was just that moment of again sweeping that stuff under the carpet, and I always say to people now when I talk to people about doing that, I say, the longer we sweep stuff under the carpet, eventually it trips us up. And so I was afraid that, like I was like, what do I do with that? And um, yeah, I think that was the hardest part is just not knowing what I could do because I didn't have the words, I didn't have um, and I think about it now as a father and my children. Man, I'm like super hyped when it like anything with all kids or anyone, not just in not my own family, but my all extended family. I'm just always watching our babies and making sure that, where are they going? No, no, don't send them off there. Don't on their own. The world it's different and it's scary. And so for me, it's yeah, it doesn't leave you, eh? And I've got the scar on my hand. I talk about it often, and it happened when I was 2. My mum had the old dripping or something cooking on the oven or something, and I wandered in there, tried to pull it off, and couldn't grab it, and I rested it on my hand. And as a child, that scar was embarrassing, and because it was on my hand, and it was really, and I would put it in my walk around with my hand in my pocket always. But I look at it now, and unless I point it out, people wouldn't even know it was there. But I always talk about it as the scar is there to remind me of something that happened in the past. It's healed. The healing has taken place, and my hand is healed, but the scar remains. And
Yes.
no matter what, it's part of my story. It's part of the journey of life. And we have many scars and many things like that that happen to us. And so I hold that with a real I just hold it with care, like all of that, the story of life. Like, and I embrace people's story because of that.
Yeah.
Because my story is different to whoever I'm talking to right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not ever going to try and compare my story, but I always would think to myself, your story is your story and your pain is your pain. And I'm not here to say, oh, you shouldn't feel like that,
No. No,
you
no.
know?
And I agree. And I think what you're sharing is really invaluable for us as survivor community. So thank you so much. I guess, Dean, as we move on through your life, were there any other situations where you did experience any more sexual abuse?
No, it wasn't. I never had any other incidents of sexual abuse. Mine came later with physical abuse, as um, in my relationship. And and so that's where it kind of shifted for me. Um, in my marriage really, and that in my first marriage, and So that's kind of where, because I think from when I when I popped out the other end of that, I was in a after that one, I kind of had rebelled a little bit. I think when you talk about earlier, how did that manifest? I think where it manifested, I started trying to, because I'm a gentle, I'm a gentle, some people call me a gentle teddy bear. But I'm like a brown bear if anyone, messes with my family or people I love. But I think in that moment, I realized I actually I have to change that narrative because I need to survive and I'm not going to let anyone do anything like that. So I went down a path of just being an egg as a teenager. And I mean, I think most teenagers have their moments of that, but I did a whole lot of random stuff and got involved in a whole lot of stuff um, to try and appease my grandfather. I heard my grandfather say once that you never let the Clarkson name down. And in my head, I heard you've obviously let the Clarkson name down by the things that have happened to you, right? So I had to become something that I wasn't to kind of get the approval of my grandfather. So I thought. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting how that can play on our minds and how, as a child or young person, you absorb that and get that meaning from it. And, only if you're comfortable too and fine if that's not available today. Would like to hear about perhaps what led you or what did happen within your first marriage that's led you to the amazing work you do, because our audience would love to know about the incredible work you're doing. So if you're comfortable or as much or as little as you're prepared to share with us.
yeah, okay, sure. I think for me, it was again, another narrative really that gets portrayed in our communities, and so I entered into a marriage, I mean, into a relationship with a young girl at the time, and I think I was just out of school a year, so very young, 18. 18 I was. She would have been 17, and everything got kind of serious quite quickly. But I've kind of only unpacked this on a level in terms of as I've moved through this and healed through this, going back and seeing stuff that I didn't see in the moment. Again, it's because as a man, as a male, um, we have so much, um, and I say this in a really hugely respectful way because I hate all the things that have happened to our babies and our females, but for our tāne, for our men, there's a narrative that is put out there that we are tough. We're raised with language of harden up. We're raised with, drink some cement, all of this kind of narrative, and we have these moments in our journey as men where men actually live out what they've been told to live out. And so there's been a huge amount of abuse at the hands of our men, which is not okay on any level. Um, Abuse to anyone, any other human being is not okay. And I just want to say that right from the outset. But as a male to receive that stuff, especially when you're raised in a, I was raised, I remember one of my uncles, um, he's known as, he's a colorful man, is my uncle, and he's had a journey and a half in his own sense, but he has some really strong values that were given to me by my nan and pop, to him as well. And I remember him saying to me as a young boy, that you were never to lay a hand on a woman, that you were never to touch a woman. And if he ever heard that I had laid a hand on a woman, he said that was the most gutless thing you could ever do as a man. And I never ever forget those words. There's only a few lessons in life that I hold on to, and they're like cement for me. And that was one of them. They're like foundations or pillars for me. And I have done everything in my life to make sure that that was never going to happen, despite what came. And as we grew into this relationship, things would start off, and it started by throwing the car keys at you and put a hole in the wall behind you, and all these things. And I think, oh, that's just an argument. And we,
Is that from your wife to
yeah,
you?
yeah,
Right.
my
Okay.
ex-wife, and
Yeah.
so she would, we'd have this argument, and then she'd throw the car keys. And I remember distinctively when that was one of the first incidents that happened, and it grew like, and I think, oh, there's nothing much in that. And then it it started to kind of grow over time, and then some days that I remember the ironing board went, flying through the air, and then the iron went flying, and in family violence and domestic violence, because I do education in that space now, and that's that intimidation factor and trying to gain control of that, those, the yelling and the screaming and all of that would come. Um, and I'm not saying that I didn't have like when I was, there were moments where because I was quite cheeky, and so I would see something like that happen, and I would be smart. I'd be cheeky or sarcastic back, and not granted, and then it would escalate more, and then I would, oh, I better not do that again because I know what is going to happen. And so over time, it got worse and worse. It hadn't been physical at that point, but I remember a particular day I was driving. We were going to working with young people. I remember driving down this road in Manukau, and then all of a sudden I just got this backhand to the head. And again, I these arguments, I don't know what they were over, whether I don't know. I can't I can't recall none of the actual arguments ever seemed like they were that anything like that ever was justified, because that's never justified. But I still to this day kind of can't figure out. We were fighting. There was an argument going on in the car, and then all of a sudden I got this physical. And I remember driving up the curb, and I nearly hit the power pole. I braked, and I was just like, what the hell is, and again, it was that moment of, I'm a man. Who do I tell? And because society tells me to be hard. Society tells me I've got, family that say I need to be hard and I need to be strong and I need to be this and that. And society's saying that. And I'm going, if I tell anyone, everyone's going to laugh at me. Everyone's going to think, and again, because it's a female. And so I just swept it under again and carried on. And so these things continue to get, at that point, once you cross that line, it's easy to go back to that space, right? And um, so things did get worse. They escalated over time. I remember an incident. There were a number of incidents that that happened, and it was quite irregular. Um, but even in bed and having being hit, and then even like, my throat grabbed on my throat, it's like scratched, strangled, and like, and because I'm quite a big fella, again, and so I was always like, who's going to believe me?
Yeah.
Because I'm a big guy. And I remember there were moments there were times where I physically would have to just like put a bear hug around, um, so that it would stop, and she would then cry, and I would hop in the car and go. I would just take off. And I just, because I didn't want her to hop in the car because she was so angry. I went into, I've got to get out of here. So I would just go. The moment I could get out, I would go. Um, but what I did do in those moments was I would go straight to a bottle store. I knew every single bottle store in Auckland, and I knew which is the latest ones that would stay open. How bad's that? Because that was what I would do. I would go there to numb my pain.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I couldn't talk to anyone. I would go straight there and I would drink.
Yeah.
And so it just got worse and worse. And then I would drive home. I mean, ashamedly, I would drive home.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there.
Stop me.
Dean, what you're saying is, I'm so sad that happened, and I know the incredible work that you now do off the back of that, which
Yes,
which we need to hear about. But I need to give you pause for a moment, please.
sure.
There is no shame in self-preservation and trying to survive that level of ongoing, repeated, deliberate trauma. Yes, you went to a bottle store to numb your pain because you'd been conditioned your whole life to never speak. So you didn't speak. At the end of the day, as survivors of this type of trauma and sexual abuse, people do what they do to try and manage it. That's all you were doing. So the time for self-admonishment or blame or feeling ashamed because you drank and drove, sorry, that ship sailed. That's over now. We just look at you survived, thank God you survived,
Mm.
and that you're here doing what you're doing. So are you able to share with us, please, what this has led to in the
Yeah, sure. I
incredible
mean, so I
work?
think for me, and again, like what I do associate that drinking though with is I couldn't drink when I was like five, or six, but again, it's that abusing the
Yes.
body.
Yep.
I'm not worthy. Like I just would hate on myself, and I've
Yep.
got this self-esteem. I've had it all my life. Oh, you're ugly, you're fat. Look at you, and I would say this stuff to myself,
Yep.
just to try and keep me down here, right? And so. But there was an incident that happened, and it was awful. And again, my two beautiful princesses came into my life, yeah. And again, through all of that time, it amped up even more.
You mean
And
your children, because
my
people
children, my two
don't.
girls, yeah, my two daughters,
Yeah.
um, to my first wife. And I remember I did everything, because again, the narrative in our country is that, is where are the men? When are the men going to stand up? And I would go to every single appointment. I would be there for my babies. I would do anything for them. But I remember this incident, and I remember watching TV or and read different articles because I wanted to get out, but I didn't know how. I was a pastor of a church. I had a church theology going on that people said you can't leave. You had that narrative. I had men, harden up. Well, I had all these different voices. Everyone says, "Oh, just get out, just leave." It's not as easy as just getting your bags and going. And then my daughters, what's going to be the impact? Because my dream was never to have a broken home. I never ever wanted that for my babies. And so the hardest day of my life was the day that I actually had to walk out of that house, knowing that my babies were going to come home from school and Papa wasn't going to be there. That breaks me to this day. And that happened in 2012. And I remember, so there was an incident that happened. It was pretty extreme. And I got hit over the face with a bottle and it was pretty ugly. I grabbed my bike. I took off this particular night. I don't know why I grabbed my push bike, but I grabbed my push bike and I ran. I drove through I rode through all the alleyways in Mangere, and I remember lying in the flax bushes, which it's always a funny thing because my first incident that
Yeah.
happened, I remember that the flax bushes were warm.
Yeah.
And I remember hopping inside in the middle of these flax bushes in the Pack and Save car park in Mangere which happened to be right across the road from the Mangere police station. And not once did it enter my head to go across and ask for help. And so I remember that incident and thinking, I've got to get out of here. I've got to leave. But then not long after that happened, my daughter's grandfather, passed away, and I've been in that family for 20 years, and I couldn't leave, so I stayed, trying to give messages of hope to this church community that I was a part of at the time every week, and and I always say this, that humanity has this huge capacity to absorb pain. We continue to pile it on, and so for me, that moment for me was huge. And so when I had to actually confront this and actually choose to go, and I found it very, very difficult. And but I did, and I made that decision to leave. There's a lot of things that have happened since that moment. I was just lucky I had somewhere to go. My parents were really supportive. And there's a whole lot of other narratives that go with the story, obviously, but yeah, it was just ugly. And so coming out of that and going through everything else outside of that and trying to navigate all of that, I've always worked in community, and I've always realized that there's not a lot of support for our men, and a lot of the campaigns around family violence is often around for men and for women and their children.
Yes.
And because our stats say they paint a picture, and everyone likes their stats, and that's what the stats are, even though family violence is underreported on both sides. Because in 20 years, I never reported it once. So I don't feature in those stats.
No.
And I recall asking, I was working with a colleague of mine, and I remember we were looking to try and help him, this man, and he said, "There's just nothing." And he goes, "You just need to start it." And I said, "Start what?" And he goes, "You need to start something." I said, "Yeah, I've thought about it, but anyway, I decided that was where I wanted to end up, and this was going to be the legacy that I'd leave behind for my children, so that my babies would never ever have to grow up in that environment ever again, and nor would any of our children in Aotearoa. That's my ultimate vision. And I remember, because my daughter said that to me once, "Why did you leave?" And that broke my heart because I didn't want to leave. But she was too little at the time to articulate that. But I just said, "I just don't want you to grow up in that fighting anymore. They don't deserve to grow up in that space." And so in 2023, I said to my wife, "Can we buy a property?" My new wife, because that's another story. But and she's been an absolute rock of support to me and to my beautiful girls. We've got two sons as well now, twins. And so for me, that was really, I set up a charitable trust with a whole lot of people that have been knowing me all my journey, back from when I was 15. As he's our accountant, he was my youth group leader back in the day. Everyone's kind of got behind to support this.
Yeah.
But we've got our first refuge for men and their children in Aotearoa. Yes, we opened it. The amazing thing is that we opened this where I am right now. We opened this on the 22nd of July, 2024, and that was 12 years to the day that I had walked out, and
Wow.
my daughter's coming from school, and it was actually my big girl, my oldest one, that when the iwi blessed our building, they got my daughter to open the door, and they had no idea of the story, so that was really significant to me. And so, I don't do any of this to run their mum down or anything like this, but I do this because I don't want any of our families or I don't want our men to have nowhere to turn to um, anymore. I want someone to reach out. And again, we need our women's refuge. We need our men's refuge. We shouldn't, but we do.
Yes.
My really dear friend of mine, Jude, who I work with, and she does a lot of education around family harm, family violence. And she always says family violence are two words that should never ever have to go together. Family and violence. They're not meant to come after each other. In the true essence of what family should be. And so that drives me to keep going. And so we're trying.
Well,
We're trying to get going. And
you're
I will continue to go.
you're doing an incredible amount of work for our men, and to provide a place of safety is so important. And I think it's really time for Aotearoa and the rest of the world to stand up and recognize that, not only do boys and young men get sexually abused, but also they can grow into adults who become domestically and physically abused. So I think it's really important that we have what you're providing, and congratulations, it's groundbreaking, it's trailblazing, and what you do has such value and provide such hope. Thank you so much. So, Dean, we need to finish.
Yes,
I
I'm
know.
sure. I could
I
talk all
know.
day with you.
I know, same. But is there anything you would like to finish with, please, before I close out?
I just want our listeners or anybody really to that come across this. And I always believe that the right people come across the right things at the right time, for that right season of your life. But that there are people, and I remember there's an ex All Black of our country, and he had a depression campaign. Sir John Kerwin said this thing on an ad years and years and years ago. Uh, um, And he said, if you go to someone and they don't get it, keep going until you find someone that does. And I
Yes.
guess that's the message for me, is that, like, if you can't like find, and sometimes you don't have the resource, like you're tired and it's hard, but there are people that can connect you to the right support and help. Because I want everyone to have the freedom to, well, be free of this yuck that sometimes we have to carry. And like you say, hand the shame back. And so I think for me, that's that keep going and find the person you need to reach out, and they are there.
Yeah.
Some are few and far between, but there is plenty of support.
100%. And I love that. Hey, Dean, can you stay right there, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. So, fabulous survivors, how special is Dean? How lucky are we that he has begun this in our country of New Zealand? But equally, it shines a light for those across the world who may want to start something for themselves. And also the incredible bravery and what he described in terms of his own history of child sexual abuse. The more we hear, the more we can help others. So, again, and as always, beautiful survivors, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.